Hello and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to just wait a minute or two so everybody who's logged on will enter into the Zoom webinar. Again, welcome if you're just joining us. We will get started in a few seconds. All right, hello everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar on navigating COVID-19 for small-scale food scrap collectors, drop-off and curbside. We had 477 folks registered from 44 U.S. states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, plus 11 countries representing every continent except Antarctica. It's quite amazing. Thank you for joining. I'm Brenda Platt, the director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance's Composting for Community initiative, and I'll be your moderator today. We're advancing local composting to create jobs, enhance soils, protect the climate, and reduce waste. We have lots of resources, including our Composting for Community podcast, which in the coming episodes will focus more voices on navigating COVID-19. So if you're interested, let us know. Like the U.S. Composting Council, we have created a COVID-19 resource page, which includes a wide range of resources from do-it-yourself mask making and non-toxic EPA-approved disinfectants to sample protocols our network has shared with us. Again, if you have more recommendations, we would love to include you on our resource page. So again, please share. We are very pleased to be collaborating with the U.S. Composting Council to offer this webinar. The Council is a trade association whose mission is also to advance composting and compost utilization. To go to its COVID-19 resource page and past webinars in this series, you can go to www.compostingcouncil.org and under the Research Educate navigation button, select COVID-19 resources, and that'll take you not only to a whole bunch of resources, including an FAQ on home composting, but also links to the previous webinars recorded in this series. Few other housekeeping notes. Everyone is on mute, so use your audio settings to adjust the sound or switch to calling in by your phone. There's a question and answer box, so after we our panelists speak and we ask some questions, have a discussion, we'll be taking your questions at the end. So at any time you can type into the Q&A box. We'll do our best to get to your questions. Today's webinar is part 3 in a multi-part series, Composting in the Time of COVID-19. The series is convened by the U.S. Composting Council. Today we'll be focusing on collection issues for food scraps. If you have questions about safe procedures at compost sites, please check out webinars 1 and 2. The next webinar will feature the reemergence of the Victory Garden and selling compost to customers sheltering in place, and that'll be offered just Earth Day week. So check those out. The link is shown right here. Today I'm really pleased to moderate this session with our amazing panel of practitioners. We're going to hear from food scrap collectors, mostly private, but we have one government representative, and they're going to share their experience in adapting both drop-off and curbside collection programs, how they're adapting in response to COVID-19. We're going to cover new safety protocols, defending the right to collect food scraps for composting, the services that have been paused, and even new services that are being offered during this time. So we have Daryl Braithwaite, Public Works Director for the City of Tacoma Park in Maryland. Tacoma Park is serving about 1,800 households with opt-in food scrap collection. Dan Maish from EcoCycle in Boulder, Colorado. There's a nonprofit recycler that works with cities along Colorado's Front Range, and EcoCycle was founded in 1976 and helped make Boulder one of the first 20 communities in the U.S. to even offer curbside recycling. Eileen Banaira is the founder of Community Compost Company, based in the Hudson Valley of New York and also serving New Jersey. Ceci Pineda is the executive director of BK Rot in Brooklyn, New York, a nonprofit collector and composter focused, based in Brooklyn, is based in the current epicenter. Jeremy Brzezowski, founder and CEO of Compost Cab in DC, a model to many of you small-scale food scrap collectors, and he's successfully defended Compost Cab's right to continue city-sponsored drop-off collection at farmers markets. We'll talk more about that. And then I'm pleased that Natasha Duarte, director of the Composting Association of Vermont, CAV, will also share new protocols being developed to help rural community composting sites in Vermont and elsewhere be able to continue to operate. In a minute, they'll say a few introductory words, and then I will ask them some questions, and at the end, we'll open it up to your questions. First, I wanted to share some results of the questions we asked when you registered. So we asked who you are you a composter, a government agency, a nonprofit, a hauler, or other? Of those who registered, about 51% said they were composters, 11% haulers, there's a little bit overlap. 31% of you are government representatives and 25% other and nonprofits. We asked, does your state consider either source separated organics collection or composting an essential business or service? Only 11% said no, 51% said yes, but 38% did not know, was unclear. That's kind of interesting. And then the last question we asked is, if you are an organics hauler or a composter, have you had to cut back your operations to such an extent that you need financial assistance for the operation or your workers? And there, I didn't quite write this down right, but 10% have closed all operations. 30% of you who fell into this category cut back on operations. Only 7% had to lay off or furlough staff. I say only in quotes because it's still significant, and I'm sorry. And 9% said you would like info on state and federal financial assistance programs. Almost half, 46%, thankfully said no or not yet in terms of being impacted. So that was just the results of what you shared. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions. Most of the questions that you did submit focused on safety protocols during collection and community drop-off programs. So we're going to try to really focus on those. We won't be able to get to all of your questions. Those of you who ask questions on the actual composting and the virus and the processing, again, I'll point you to the first two webinars. So with that, Daryl, I'm going to hand it over to you to make some introductory remarks on the city of Tacoma Park.
Sure, thanks and welcome. Tacoma Park is a small municipality that shares a border with the District of Columbia. We've been providing a curbside food waste collection program for just about 5 years, maybe a bit more. We collect, as Brenda said, from a little over 1,800 households, and we collect a wide variety of food waste. As with most things, we're dependent on our processing plants to determine what we can collect. We currently rely on Prince George's County for our food waste processing. Lastly, we also provide a weekly collection for yard waste. We do it separately, again, because of the processing capacity in our area. We've had that program in place for decades. It runs year-round and is usually one of the things we collect the most on. So that's pretty much our program in a nutshell.
Great, thanks. All right, Dan, if you could unmute. Dan Maish with EcoCycle in Boulder, Colorado.
Greetings. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As Brenda mentioned, EcoCycle is a 44-year-old organization that combines advocacy and operations. So while in the hauling realm, we are not in the, we do not do residential hauling. We only do commercial hauling, but every program that operates in Boulder County is as a result of our advocacy. So we're looked to as the authority for guidelines and so forth on what to do in a situation like this.
Great, thanks, Dan. Next up on our panel is Eileen Benaira from the Community Compost Company. Eileen.
Hi, Brenda. Hi, everyone. Community Compost is located in the Hudson Valley of New York. We operate a collection service both through the Hudson Valley and in northern New Jersey. We do food scrap collection for commercial as well as residential door-to-door, as well as municipal drop-off spots, both at farmers' gardens and at DPW yards. And we like to apply a systems approach to the whole food scrap management and waste management. So what we do is we collect, and then we also process this material at a farm in Kerhonkson, New York. So we have a certified product in our compost, and our compost is under Hudson Soil Company. So we're proud of the material we make, and like to do the whole full circle approach to composting and collection. Thank you.
Great. And next up is Ceci Pineda, Executive Director of BK Rott in Brooklyn. Ceci.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be joining today. So we are a nonprofit staffed by young people of color. We collect food waste from commercial and residential entities, and we also host a public drop-off. And all of our collection is by bike and by a cargo e-trike. And then we distribute compost locally to community members and gardens, and also provide some for some retail stores. And I think I forget if I mentioned this, but yes, we also host drop-off on site, and we compost everything in our garden in Bushwick, Brooklyn.
Great, thanks.
System. Yeah, thank you.
Good. Thanks, Ceci. All right, next up, Jeremy Brzezowski, Compost Cab.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everybody. It's Jeremy Brzezowski from Washington, D.C. We have been doing community-based composting since 2010. We take a very comprehensive and overarching approach to it. All composting is good composting, and all composting is better than landfilling. So we have three primary lines of business. We work with households on a residential collection program. We work with municipalities on their core issues of sustainability and helping them run programs. And then we work with commercial entities of all sizes and shapes to help them activate their zero waste efforts, specifically around organics collection. And we've been doing it for a while.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Last up is Natasha Duarte, Director of the Composting Association of Vermont.
Yeah, thanks everybody for inviting me to join this panel. Unlike the other panelists, I'm not personally involved in running a compost site, but I work with a number of rural community compost sites, primarily in Vermont, but also around New England. These are just some images of the scale, which is a little bit different than some of the other sites that folks on the call may be familiar with. So these are at gardens, co-housing, places, nature centers, senior housing, food shelves, libraries, and other sites. And while they are pretty small scale, they're making significant impacts on organic diversion in their communities and awareness around organic diversion and not landfilling, and a number of local soil health initiatives within their community. So I'll be talking a little bit about sort of representing the work that I do with a number of these different small scale sites.
Great, thank you all. So for those of you who just joined, you can feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box at any time. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Okay, so for our panel, the first question, what safety protocols have you put in place to protect your workers? And Daryl, we're gonna start with you.
Sure. Well, most of it is common sense, and it certainly follows the guidance that we're hearing for keeping ourselves safe at home. However, we've amplified that just given the proximity of employees. First and foremost, of course, is providing personal protective gear, gloves, and plenty of them. We also have always had a laundry service, so we are encouraging people to use the laundry service. They have enough uniforms to last for a 2-week period, so remove their clothes at the end of the route, put it in the laundry, and let that be commercially laundered. Also, we provide goggles and the regular dust masks in the past. We're looking at enhancing the masks. The governor of Maryland recently has changed some of the requirements, so we're looking at using the masks. Our collection crews are working at a pretty fast pace off the back of our trucks, so they normally are running their routes. So face masks is going to be one of those things that we're going to have to work real hard to figure out how to make that work with people's normal schedule. Another part of that is the social distancing. So we have provided a remote logging in and off, so you don't have to come into the break room for the time clock. We have a lounge, but we're now encouraging staff to eat separately and elsewhere, though we're doing regular cleaning of that. We had a sanitation bay where all our trucks are parked, and it was adjacent to the locker room. We've now started parking our trucks in various parts of the yard, so each truck is separated, and there's less interaction of the staff, nor need to for the staff to gather together while they're getting ready. And then we're basically have assigned drivers to each truck so they can maintain the cleanliness of the cab and have some level of comfort being the main person in that cab. Everybody's got sanitizing wipes provided for the truck. Our collection staff, we no longer have ride in the truck. We have the ability to do that because we are such a tight little community. So 2.2 square miles and largely residential. So we're not having to drive on highways when we're doing collection. So we're following those protocols. So the staff ride on the outside of the truck for collection. And then the driver rides alone to the processing facility. And that's always been the case. You know, basically our sanitation division has become our top priority. So all other staff in the department are facilitating our sanitation collection. So we're using additional employees as needed when staff numbers drop.
Great, thanks, Daryl. Dan, tell us what you're doing at EcoCycle.
Okay, in terms of PPE, it's at this point, I think fairly standard. Our response, number one, trying to source it and not always finding exactly what we're looking for, but making sure that our drivers have the basics. They are not using goggles, but other than that, it pretty much follows what the city of Tacoma is doing. We have made one change to our guidelines in that we are asking customers to not include tissues or napkins if they have any symptoms of sickness. Normally we do ask people to put their soiled paper in the compost bin, but we're asking them to make that exception until further notice to protect our workers. And then in the social distancing between the drivers, similar to what was just mentioned, we have remote login. We have you know, everybody who normally is in the office is at home. And we've asked the drivers to work on a staggered system so that we are, so they're less likely to run into each other. If they do need to go into the office, staggered schedule is what I mean. And then, you know, we're very reliant on hand sanitizers, as I think most people are at this point. And then our compost processor has instituted no hand picking. Normally, the first step for them is to, when a load gets dumped, is to hand pick out any, you know, basketballs or football helmets or whatever ends up in there. They're not doing that. They're doing what they can with tools and loaders and hoping for the best with the rest of it. And hopefully it will, we'll be able to screen it out later. And I'll say one other thing about our processor that I think ties into next week's webinar, that there's a lot of people buying compost right now, so that's the good thing. And because we are advocates for composting, I'll just mention that we are also impacted. We have a bill before the state legislature that we're really excited about to connect compost to agriculture use, and that's our legislature is on hold. We have a county compost facility that is scheduled to be constructed in 2021. I'm afraid that's probably going to get pushed off by a year probably. And I'll mention that we also are, kind of putting up, telling people there's so much disposable, there's an uptick in disposables as a result of this pandemic, and I think that's justified, but we're also like just putting in a little placeholder saying, this isn't going away, that we need to get rid of single-use plastics. So that's our that's sort of how this is impacting us. Here, as I mentioned, we are, though we don't do residential collection, we are responsible for both the recycling, producing both the recycling and the composting guidelines that everyone in the county is follows. And so just making mention that while tissues aren't directly mentioned here on the compost, napkins are. So, and then we do have a coronavirus specific web page with the latest updates. And here's where you find that our request to not include tissues. And of course, we're sharing this with not only our subscribers, but also all the local municipalities and haulers, so that there's hopefully some continuity there. And so we produced a quick one-pager on just, we've been doing a lot of work, as a lot of people have been doing, on trying to stem this, the plastics tide and the single-use tide in particular. And it's plastic bag bans are suspended or dropped across the country as a result of the pandemic. And as I say, perhaps that is the cautious and appropriate approach. But we are, I think this is a sterling opportunity for the plastics industry to squash all that, and we're going to do our best to keep this issue front and center. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Eileen, you want to share with us what you're doing to protect your workers?
Sure. So we're doing pretty much the same as everyone else, protective gear. We first of all started, no one's allowed and comes into our office anymore. So we do have a farm where we make compost and we're dropping material, and it's wide open, and everyone, I would say social distancing is, 15, 20 feet apart when we're there, but it's usually not more than 2 people on any given, acre, so to speak. So we're pretty distant as far as that. We have a pretty sophisticated login system and our routing system for our trucks. So we the drivers log in remotely, and then we do the routing from that. The protective gear, gloves, bandanas, masks. We are operating in New York and New Jersey, not New York City, but the lower Hudson Valley and in northern New Jersey, which has also been hit pretty hard with this pandemic. So, I was very concerned when we started whether we should continue or not. And 2 of our cities, both Jersey City and Hoboken, that we work with, have asked us to continue. So, with that, we're trying to balance how we protect our staff. So we also have the drivers clean before and after they get in the truck. And I make them do it twice because, the second time, I don't care. And they're only drivers are using the same truck. So no 2 people in a truck ever. And if we need a second person to help someone, they're going in a separate vehicle, which is a problem in terms of additional gas and wear and tear on the environment. But so we have had assigned vehicles. Let me see, cleaning in before and after the truck, because, you know, I tell them that even if they're only using the truck themselves, I want them to clean it both before and after. We've sent things out to our customers. Our customers are fantastic and have been very responsive, and we've asked them to take care of us, and we'll try to take care of them. And we've got nothing but positive reinforcement from that. So, and I would agree with the idea that, yeah, there's a lot of people buying compost. People are cooking. So our residential collection is, I'm going to say, has not slowed up. If anything, we're taking in probably a little bit more, you know, food scraps because of the people cooking, I think, more at home. And yes, people are buying compost, and I think they're setting up their own little growing areas and planters. So, you know, that's the positive outcome from that. So, and these are some of our notes from our customers, which are, you know, which are fantastic. It's just so sweet. That's all I got, Brenda.
Thanks, Eileen. And one thing, we're getting some questions, so I'll circle back to Dan and Daryl on this too, but if you want to address this, and then Jeremy, and Ceci, you're up next, so you can address it. But there's questions about how you're using the gloves, latex or otherwise. Are they being changed between every bucket and house or less frequently? Somebody asked for Daryl particularly, are workers still emptying home food waste buckets? Touching all those handles couldn't touching all those handles spread disease from household to household? So if, Eileen, before I move from you, if there's anything you're doing on the actual gloves.
So the gloves, you know, I hate the idea of single-use anything, and I think there's a place for them, but we've bought, I'm going to say heavy-duty gloves. You can see the blue ones that my staff person's wearing on the left. So we do have a spray bottle. So when we go anywhere, we're literally spraying the top of the bucket before and after, before we pick it up and after we pick it up, and then we're cleaning our gloves. Again, the gloves are signed to them. Is that the best protocol? It's probably better if we changed it each individual thing. But again, we're using a sanitizer before, a sanitizer after, and then we spray the gloves too. So that's pretty much what we're doing. As you can see, we've asked our people to, you know, take care of our drivers. And so you can see someone on the right handle has been sanitized because they're spraying them before they put it out. And we've also asked them not to put it out the night before, so that there's not an interaction between our driver and a person. So no one sees basically anybody, fortunately and unfortunately. So
yeah, good. All right, Ceci, tell us, you're in the middle of the epicenter there in New York City.
Yes. So I guess before I go into some protocols, which are on the next slide, I'll just an overview of the services that we've provided. We've continued to do our commercial and residential food scraps pickup. We have also started doing delivering home compost kits or worm bins to an extended delivery range. And we also used to have people come into the garden to pick up compost, but now we offer it either for delivery, or our team pre-bags everything and we put it outside of the gate and schedule people to come pick it up. And in the next slide, you'll be able to see we have more comprehensive protocols for every operation that our riders do. And I'll note that here it says use a fresh pair of single-use latex gloves, but we've switched to getting our riders reusable plastic gloves or more heavy-duty gloves that they also take out 70%, at least 70% alcohol spray with them, and they spray down their gloves between each pickup. And they also have to spray down their the handlebars and all of their equipment before they get at the end of their shift. And so between each pickup, they're sanitizing their gloves. At the end of the shift, they also wash their gloves. We set up a hand washing station on site. As you see, our riders also, they wear masks and gloves as our basic like protection, and letting folks know we also have like cloth masks that they also have while they're traveling from and to the site. We've also made it so that only our staff who are able to get to the site by walking or by biking are the ones who are still working in these services. We have 2 youth who rely on public transit. And so in this time, we've continued to pay them their average salaries, but are not having them come on site. We're also supporting, our board is supporting those who have not, don't have insurance and signing up for insurance, and supporting and getting food services to those who need, and also immune supportive kits. We practice physical distancing. We've also really transformed our operations to reduce in-person contact. So we paused our public drop-off service, and we no longer accept cash for all of our the systems that we're operating. We've switched to doing it all electronically, people signing on site. And again, essentially anything that touches raw material is washed at the end of the shift, so at the end of their collection shift. And they also, because we know that the virus can live maybe at least 3 days on certain surfaces, we have, you can see kind of in the picture with Victor there are these airtight blue barrels in the back. And so they will store everything they pick up through their, that they pick up, and they won't process it until at least 3 days after it's been sitting there. So that's one other measure of safety. And we review our protocols on a weekly basis with staff and make sure that whenever we go on, we immediately wash our hands upon entering the site and also upon leaving. And I think those are, the protocols that we have, I'm happy to share them. I think Brenda might be sending them out later.
Yeah, and we already have a link on our COVID-19 resources on our page, and I think it links directly to your protocol. So as you update them, I hope we're getting the updated version as well. Thank you, Ceci.
Yes.
Jeremy, Compost Cab, tell us about your journey here.
So I have very little to add on the process side. As everyone has described very well, the sorts of protocols and processes that we've put in place on collection. I will say, I think it's actually important to note, for those of us who do collection, whether it's residential or commercial, the zero touch nature and the zero contact nature of compost collection is already in place. And so I actually think from both a residential and commercial perspective, we've seen a downtick on the commercial side in terms of volume as people have closed. We've seen an uptick on the residential side as people have been cooking more. But in balance, our systems haven't had to change all that much, other than the sort of basic blocking and tackling of social distancing and keeping things clean that everyone has already described. So our processes around that are very similar. It's in the public facing drop-off realm that things have gotten really interesting, because we exist at the intersection of the food system and the waste system. And these are both 2 essential and fundamental services, as everybody understands. But when they interact at a farmer's market, it's really, really not clear what is essential and what isn't. And so we've been working very closely for many, many weeks now with our friends and counterparts in the DC government, with our friends and counterparts in the farmers market world, to make sure as much as possible that these market drop-off points remain safe and remain open, because thousands of people citywide have come to rely on them over time. And that has been an interesting journey. And so it has been up and down. It has been very much a roller coaster. But at the moment, it appears that the drop-off program will continue here in DC in one form or another. The details are emerging just to give you a sense as to how things change, the details emerge as to where the markets will be open on a weekly basis. Because right now in the district, every market manager needs to present a safety plan on a weekly basis for approval. The city's taken it really seriously, and we love that. But from a planning perspective and an operational perspective, it has introduced some challenges. And so our kind of set and our perspective on all of this is one of optimism and one of pragmatism. right? We are optimistic. I think this is actually an incredible moment for not just the composting universe, but for everybody who cares about sustainability and justice and equity and all of those things. The one silver lining of this entire experience is that it is really underscoring the underlying fissures in our economy and bringing them to bear in a way that makes them very visible. And so I believe that the next 2 to 3 years, as we decide how to respond to this moment, are going to be critical. And I'm trying very hard to focus my team on the long term, not the short term, because in the short term, the only thing anyone should be thinking about is survival is victory. So I believe that we're all individual operators operating in our own communities. We have our individual and parochial things that we care about. But when you take a step back and you think of the macro, this is the time for us to step up and be counted. And so I view everything we can do around composting is the one little thing that we can do to help drive the larger project of building a healthier, more sustainable, more just world forward. And so from a messaging perspective and from an operating perspective, that's the kind of messaging that we're enforcing with our team. Like, you got to keep yourself safe because people are counting on us. And at Market, we bent over backwards to create a distance-based environment where we had been all about getting up close and personal, right? The whole thing that makes our Compost at the Drop Farmers Market program so successful, the reason it's grown from 0 to 7 to 8 tons a weekend over the course of the last 3 years, is because it connects with people. Those of us who are in this composting world, we know how powerful that tool can be. And so our COVID-19 response has been to fight for our values and what we believe in and defend them every day. And the good news is the community is with us. Everybody is on the same page. The city wants to keep things open. The people want to keep things open, but it is a tumultuous time. And that's why our attitude is patience. Let's get through it. And let's focus on what it's going to be on the other side. So I don't know if that directly speaks to protocols, but I think the mindset that leads us to compost is exactly the same mindset that will lead us as a country and as a world through this crisis, right? Think about what we ask of composters. Take a little bit of extra time to do separation, do a little bit of extra work on the front end, and it'll make you feel great and it'll be good for the planet and good for the community. That is exactly the same thing we are asking of social distancing and sheltering in place. It's the same ask. And so I view what we do as composters as setting the table for what we need to be as a society going forward.
Right. I think, Jeremy, that's important. And we had a number of the webinar registrants asking questions about messaging and communications. We're going to get more into this in a little bit, but how can we convince the public it's important to compost now more than ever, and educating residents about how to continue these programs and how to do it safely and that they are being done safely. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on to a few remarks from Natasha on the protocols that she's developed, a work in progress, organic, for rural community composting sites, a number of which are drop-off. So Natasha, please run us through these.
Thanks, Brenda. So yeah, and I'll go a little bit more quickly on some of the points that have already been touched on by other folks. But the first thing that I really start with, so all of the sites that I work with are drop-off. So people are bringing their scraps to the sites. And so that's the context within which these guidelines were developed. And many of them certainly could apply to other scenarios, but just so you have that as the backdrop. And so really, in terms of people staying safe and feeling safe, I think it's really important to recognize that we all have different comfort levels and different concerns, and the sites are in different types of communities, some really rural and way out there with like 6 households participating, and others that are maybe 20 or 30 households and a little bit more, from a rural perspective, a little bit more dense of a neighborhood. And so I really start with helping the different groups that I work with think through what their response is going to be. So, you know, the first is like, where are you located? Are there any other options for organic management in your community? In many cases, there aren't, except for like backyard, or at least nothing easy or readily accessible. And then also thinking, you know, some of the sites are really quite small. And so is there enough space for the site to allow for social distancing? So those are sort of key things. The other thing to think about is who the members are. So, you know, what are a lot of them at higher risk demographics, like at a senior citizen center versus, you know, versus some other demographics that aren't in those higher risk categories. And so there's also a piece of, you know, sort of whatever you choose, make a plan and communicate the plan. And you know, it's okay to close. The message is really, it's okay to close if the people who are in charge of running it don't feel like they can do it safely. If you're reliant on a volunteer pool and too many of them have expressed or are unable to continue, that's obviously a big influence. And then as well, we've had some sites where the folks managing it did a big push, and I'll talk a little bit about the communication side afterwards. But the people who are the generators, the people who are bringing and dropping off their food scraps, stop bringing it. And so that was a little bit of a different thing. So it's really all of these different scenarios are what people are starting to think through. So for the sites that have decided to close, you know, I've been reviewing with them. Many of them are relatively new. So reviewing with them sort of how to close down a small site, recognizing that they have organics at different stages of decomposition, making sure that everything is left tidy and secure, posting temporary closure signs so people know if they're passing or if someone didn't get the message in another way and they come. Depending on where they are, there are some folks who are posting no dumping or trespassing signs. A couple of the sites do have locking gates, but not many. And then this is also an opportunity for these sites to work with their members. Many of the sites are run by compost stewards, and so it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but some of the sites have the participants just bring, and they just bring their food scraps and put it in a collection container, and then the compost steward measures the volume and integrates it into the system. And so this is actually a really great alternative to sort of start extending that composting knowledge out and encouraging backyard composting for folks who maybe hadn't covered that. For the folks who want to stay open, we're recommending changes in drop-off procedures, so staggering drop-off times or scheduling them. Actually physically marking off 6 or 10 foot distances, because people tend to underestimate what that distance really is. For the sites that weren't, their members were just sort of dropping them off, some have moved to having their members actually integrate the scraps directly into the system. And there's someone there helping with that from a safe distance, but also with the recording. And then some have switched to using compostable bags just to limit direct exposure to the raw food scraps. All are requiring protective personal equipment to some extent, but primarily it's been washable gloves and masks. They're being able to set up hand washing stations, or and then also posting hand washing instructions is a recommendation. And then also updating and reviewing protocols for use of tool and how to safely clean them, and not just the tools themselves, but also you know, sanitizing and wiping down any of those commonly or often touched parts of the bins. This is all summarized in a sort of a 4-page info sheet that's available on compostingvermont.org, and that site links out to a bunch of other resources as well. So in terms of temporary changes to materials being accepted, a lot of that is the same of what you've already heard, so you can look at that. I'm not going to go over that too much. But the big thing with these groups that we've been emphasizing is, like, let people know, and we're all overwhelmed and kind of juggling a bunch of things, and other parts of our lives have been disrupted. So reminding people, however it is that they communicate, with their group is what they need to be doing. So phone, email, online meetings, some of the changes for the system, the people participating at the site might require more training. So making available some online training options, and then not forgetting to add signage at the site. So some people are posting signs and forgetting to call people, and other people are doing a really great job and thinking of like doing an email blast, but not necessarily remembering to post signs. We also recommend that folks who are continuing to operate, get in touch with their neighbors who may or may not be participating in their site to reaffirm that safely managing organics is an essential service, and sharing with them the safety protocols that they've put in place to just help people feel a little bit more comfortable about that. And then just that all of this, like all of training, is iterative. So, you know, as other panelists have said, the rules are changing. You know, certainly we're recommending that anyone who is not feeling well or has household members who may be not feeling well stay home. So just being able to have redundancy in the systems and be able to, you know, get up every day and know that it might be managed a little bit differently.
Thanks.
Yeah,
great, Natasha. Thank you. One of the participants shared that Grow Amsterdam, New York has scheduled drop-offs in 10-minute intervals with Doodle, and people empty their own container and they don't touch it at all. So thanks for sharing that, Tom.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, Brenda, if I could just jump in, is like, is how do you manage flow of people at a place like the DuPont Circle Farmers Market, where on any given Sunday you would normally have between 700 and 900 people dropping off compost in a 5-hour window.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So, so it all depends on what you're trying to maximize for. And so it's all a series of compromises.
And the scale of your site, for sure.
Yeah. And safety protocols are going to be different depending on your local situation and what you can do. Physical distancing, personal protective equipment, you know, mask, gloves, certain things, you know, going to be very critical. But I like, Natasha, how you ended with the communications piece, because that leads into our next question, which is, you know, how are you communicating your safety protocols to your team? And maybe instead of, since we'll just have you do both, the next question was, how are you, both your workers, but then communicating a separate kind of line of communications with your clients and your customers. So Daryl, we'll start with you. And if you all can keep your answers really short this round, I think we can move on to, you know, we'll get to more questions.
Sure. Well, the communication with our team, our employees, has been ongoing since this has started. So that happens initially on a kind of city manager type basis, but we're, you know, maintaining regular communication with the supervisor of the division just to make sure any concerns or issues of the staff are being raised. So far, I mean, the measures were put in place at the beginning, and that's what we've completed. The communication to the public, because we're a city, we have far more other issues that are getting communicated on a regular basis. So we haven't really been focused on specific communication other than to say collection is still taking place. So once there's a little more air in the room, we may be able to provide some additional guidance on that. In general, people are very happy to see our trucks come around, because it's reminds them that life goes on and not everything is stopped or halted. So there's a lot of kind of familiarity and comfort in that. But we haven't really focused much on providing information to the public in regard to our collection, because there's so much else that's currently filling that space.
Yeah. And Daryl, well, before I hand it on to Dan, is there anything you want to add on there's so many questions on the cleaning bucket to bucket and the gloves. Is there anything you want to add on that?
Right. Well, like others, the information about washing the plastic reusable gloves, we have people wear liners inside their gloves, and then the gloves they maintain until they want to change them. So washing those on a daily basis, as other folks have seen, when, you know, is helpful. We have not started a protocol of spraying the lids of the containers that we're collecting. for any of our collection, trash or compost. That was something that I'll be taking back to the supervisor to see about the possibilities of that. Because our containers are stored outside, placed outside, you know, it's really at this point incumbent upon the resident to take those precautions if they want to wipe down their handle or clean the handles of their trash can before they pick it up. But at this point, we aren't providing that kind of sanitation or spraying of disinfectant after we pick it up and put it back down again. Am I off?
Are you still there, Brenda?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, I think I must have accidentally hit my mute. Sorry about that. Thank you, Daryl. And Dan, I know you mentioned already, you know, your communications with your clients and customers about some of the changes. Is there anything you want to add about any other communications with your workers?
Yeah, I have to tip my hat to our lead driver. We have, I think, 6 drivers who are only 6 drivers who are actually operating right now, and our lead driver already, his modus is he's got his Bluetooth headset and he's in constant communication with the drivers out there. So they already have that that communication network going, and so he communicates with them one-on-one on which I think is really key. That, you know, rather than just you know, dictation from people who are working from home, it's the, you know, it's the drivers supporting each other and express and making sure that they're able to overcome whatever concerns they might have. And then in terms of yeah, communication to our customers and the residents at large, it's I already mentioned, we do you know, send all our information to all the municipalities in the county and rely on them to disseminate it. All the cities in our county and the county itself have subscription single hauler subscription contracts. So it's communication with one hauler and in a you know, active communication with their residents. So that helps a bunch. So yeah.
Good, good. And you know, I'm gonna just move on because I think we're to some other questions. I think we've got some examples of some communication protocols, and I did want to share this. I think Eileen, you might have mentioned that you asked your customers to put out the bins the night before. This is an infographic from Ireland, and it basically does the same thing. So folks may want to consider being more direct about that request and they're asking actually people to clean with disinfectant where possible before and after. So that's just an example of some communication. And as we get more, we'll share that out and make that more available. What I want to move on to is this question of where are you sourcing your personal protective equipment and your disinfecting supplies. We've heard through our network that a number of small scale operators have stopped because they couldn't get hand sanitizer, they couldn't get, you know, proper mask. So Eileen, let's just pick up with you, and then Daryl and Dan, if you have something to add, we'll circle back that way. But Eileen,
Yeah.
Any issues with sourcing this stuff?
No, not really. I mean, we've asked our staff, you know, again, we're trying to, you know, try to be cautious, but not, and use reusable things. So our staff is making their own face masks for the most part. And for gloves, I think we said we're using the reusable gloves. We do use, you know, an industrial strength vinegar. And I know it's, you know, comparable to bleach in terms of cleaning. So we've kind of maintained that, and we do have hand sanitizers we use. I can't tell you where we're buying them, but we haven't, you know, the sourcing hasn't really, we've gone around to a few different places, but I would say that it hasn't been that difficult. We did get the permanent, the reusable gloves. So I think, you know, we're not competing for the individual use equipment. So I think that's maybe where there's a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, I heard that vinegar is not the same disinfectant as the alcohol. You know, it works as effectively as soap. So I don't know if any of the panelists
I
want to comment on that.
Yeah, Brenda, it's Jeremy. I'll hop in here. I actually
Yeah.
think this is a significant challenge for small and mid-sized operators that is different from municipalities that are buying and usually in much larger scale. So we have a dedicated person on our team who handles operations and procurement like this, and she is spending a lot of her time making sure that our people are safe. That's now part of her job in a way that it wasn't 3 or 4 weeks ago. You know, it used to be that her job was keeping them comfortable and happy. And now her job is keeping them comfortable and happy and super duper safe. And that is it's just a different outlook. And it's forcing all sorts of creativity, like figuring out what supermarkets are getting in deliveries of gloves on what day, which local producers are making hand sanitizer, where can we source masks that are made and, you know, sewn by friends quickly in town, all of which we have managed to do. But it is operationally, I think this is an evolving situation, and the smaller you are as a business or operation, the more challenging it's about to become.
Yeah, yeah. Daryl, are you as a government agency, are you able to, you know, source your hand sanitizers and disinfectants through different channels, normal channels with your
No,
suppliers?
pretty much the same as everybody else. However, because of the work we do, we already had that in pretty big supply anyway. Gloves, disinfectant wipes, masks, we already had that stuff. So we started off with a pretty good supply that got us through for quite some time. And then we've just been ordering from our regular suppliers of those kind of materials. And because we didn't need it like immediately, we had several weeks, you know, worth of materials. When it came in, we weren't short. So we have not experienced that at this point. So we've just been using our same suppliers that we normally worked with.
Yeah, good. Lucky you. Dan, any comments on sourcing this critical equipment?
We do have a pretty good backstock, or we did have a pretty good backstock ourselves. We are going to run out. We have been requiring single-use masks. We are going to run out of them on Friday. Our regular suppliers are out. So we've been searching around on Amazon. We're going to try some reusable masks that are supposed to be delivered on Friday. And I can't speak to their reusability or effectiveness. We'll see, but we're going to be giving those a shot. That's all we can find.
Yeah. I think on the question about vinegar versus alcohol versus bleach, we do have on our website a list of EPA approved disinfectants for COVID-19. So instead of trying to answer that question live now, unless somebody knows the answer, I'm going to just refer people to those links on our website, and we'll try to send out to everybody some clarifications on that important question. One of the attendees, Thomas Witt, has shared that for sourcing PPE, that he represents an intercontinental PPE supplier, and if anybody is interested in larger quantities, he's provided his email. We'll share that out too when appropriate. So one thing that I can share, and Jeremy just alluded to this, people are making their own mask on our website too. We have quite a bit of do-it-yourself mask making. I myself have spent quite a bit looking at various sites, and I will just share that although we include links to a variety of do-it-yourself masks, this one by a nurse practitioner, she's done several versions of this, and it's a three-ply cloth plus a filter pocket. Not everybody, has a sewing machine or can make it, but almost every community has seamstresses that can be tapped to make them as Jeremy did. And I reached out to my colleague and friend Linda Blackburn, shown here, to make some prototypes that we could make available to the composting network of this particular one. I do think that the benefits of this compared to others, as I've noted, is that not only the 3-ply and the filter pocket, which could be a coffee filter, a paper towel, a blue shop towel, is that it's adjustable, not elastic, and it does have the wire nose piece. So there's, of course, lots of other information on buying reusable masks, but we're trying to help meet the need within our network. So if folks are interested, feel free to contact me. And one of the things that Linda's doing is donating proceeds and extra masks, and she's also hiring housekeepers that are out of work. So it's feel very confident just mentioning that one option. So before we open it up to other questions, I have one last question that we had planned here, and that was in order to sustain your operations, a couple of our panelists have pivoted to offering other services, and that includes BK Rod. So Ceci, please tell us more about, you mentioned it earlier, your home composting kits.
Yes, given in New York City, all public drop-offs are closed and many gardens are not receiving it anymore, we recognized a lot of people's desires to continue composting. So we have put out a video that explains how people can assemble their own compost kit so they can continue doing this at home. While we recognize you would need a very substantial worm bin system to process all of your food scraps. And yes, so we have an extended delivery range in which our workers bring these worm bins. And I also wanted to note that we are also grant funded. And so we have also been engaging in mutual aid efforts. And given, you know, our commercial collection really went down from around 10 to 15 businesses to just 3. And so we have capacity to intake more food scraps. And so we are connecting to emergency food relief to intake their scraps free of cost and hoping to offset these through with the funding that we provide from grants. We've also supported Make the Road, who is launching a delivery service to get their food pantry items to either folks who are immunocompromised or elders. And so our bikers are, we've supported in mapping out their system, and our bikers are also committed to picking up a shift to deliver. And also we're going to be piloting picking up food waste from the folks we deliver to. So trying to, as much as possible, reduce food waste and increase local food resiliency. And also we're using also grant funds or seeking to source other funds to prioritize getting our compost to mutual aid projects. So this is this is a project that came and picked up around 35 1.3 cubic feet bags that they're supporting people in setting up home gardening and home growing systems, focusing on people who are more vulnerable.
Thanks, Ceci. So I'm going to move now to Jeremy Brzezowski, which at Compost Cab, who's really pivoted his collection model to a new business. So Jeremy, tell us about Bridget.
Sure. So there's I don't think of us as being in the composting business. I think of us as being in the business of enabling people to live their values. We do that through organics recycling because it is the easiest, lowest hanging fruit to make a major difference, both in terms of the environment and in terms of behavioral change. But that's not our core business. Our core business is enabling people, whether they be organizations or municipalities or companies or individual households, to live their values. I don't think we're trying to teach people what to do or explain or tell them, you know, how they should live their lives. I take an optimistic view, which is that all things being equal, people want to do the right thing, and our job is to make them as equal as possible. So Bridget was a very simple project and came together in the course of 3 days, 3 weeks ago, when I watched as friends of ours from the farmers market started to flip out. Because all of these organizations, these are small women-owned businesses that are in the business of selling directly to consumers. We saw them in pain and freaking out. We're like, all right, how can we help? And the answer was, well, I've got a team of drivers that are not currently working on Mondays because that's our safety valve day. That's the day we do maintenance or whatever it is. And we said, okay, let's throw up a website and see if we can do a little bit of good. And so we did. We put up a website. We worked with these 5 specific small local women-owned companies who saw their farmers market channels disappear overnight. And we created a delivery product. And we tested it out in week 1, and we sold 100 of these bags, and we were able to put, you know, some money in the pockets of these entrepreneurs. And then we did it again the next week, and we had more people do it. And then we did it again the next week, and we had more people do it. So now all of a sudden we have a revenue generator that is not entirely replacing, but largely replacing the revenue that we were seeing from some of our commercial customers that have been required to turn off on a temporary basis from the as a result of the pandemic. And so some people look at it and are like, well, that seems very far afield. And from our perspective, it isn't at all. It's all about the same exact message. So you've got people trapped in their homes who want to support these women-owned businesses. They want to support the local economy. And we are just creating yet another tool for them to do that. And so all of this is through the overarching lens that I would love for people to focus on, whether you're working in, less so for the government agencies, to be candid, but for the small organizations that are out there, either the not-for-profit side or the for-profit side. I would encourage you very strongly to be focused on survival is victory. That's really the only thing you should be thinking about. How do you take your value set and get through this period and work under the assumption that it's not going to be 3 or 4 months. This is a 12 to 18 month window of chaos and uncertainty that is going to rock how we think of day-to-day operations in this country. And if you haven't internalized that yet, you're not thinking about the problem big enough.
Thank you, Jeremy.
It is the best guidance I can give.
Yeah, and the added benefit of doing what Jeremy said is you're building community self-reliance, you're supporting local independent businesses, you're embracing the kind of full circle food systems thinking. So I think it's very impressive what you're doing, Jeremy. Thank you for sharing.
Brenda, can I just add one thing?
Sure. Eileen, go ahead.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, part of the issue with this whole pandemic is also mental health. And, one of the things that we're working on is just having people grow things, whether, we hand out compost to people and we want people to, whether they're growing herbs or their own foods or just even having their children who may or may not know that throwing out a potato with an eye in it, you could actually grow it. So we're trying to encourage people to learn some of those lessons. And we're talking to, we work on a farm making compost. So we're talking to our farmers, as Jeremy, I think, said, a lot of times, a lot of our companies go down with empty trucks, come back with full trucks. So what we're looking to do is work with some of our farmers who who have lost the farmers market access, and that maybe using our customer base, if they need product, to come up with packages, bring it down to, for example, Hoboken or Jersey City, and then come back with our empty, with our full buckets for the organic recycling. So we're looking to work both with our local Hudson Valley Seed Library, as well as, setting up little planting boxes for people, because I think it is helpful for the kids also. The kids are all inside and they're all stressed out. So why don't we all learn to grow things again?
Yeah, and as Ceci said, if you can home compost in Brooklyn, in New York, you can pretty much home compost anywhere. We have we have a number of questions. We won't be able to get to them all, but there was one about, for any of you who are actually going into buildings, how are you handling going to buildings? So I don't know if Jeremy or Dan or Eileen. Jeremy, why don't we start with you? Or do you have any clients that requires you to go into buildings?
Sure, we have, but there's no difference in terms of entry requirements than we've ever had before. If anything, it's easier to gain access, not harder, because more people are around. But it's been our experience that we're basically status quo on building entry and exit. Nothing's really changed for us.
Mm-hmm. Dan, anything you want to add?
Our compost collections are almost exclusively outside in dumpsters or toters. We also collect hard to recycle materials. We do need to go inside buildings for that, but we already do have that pretty well dialed in, that it's a minimal contact. Stuff has to be on the loading dock. We don't go wandering through the buildings.
Yeah. Eileen, are you going to any buildings?
Yeah, most of ours are outside too. We really
That's
don't
good.
go in, and the offices have been shut down, so we're not at this point going in right now.
Okay. I know, Jeremy, you, for at least the residential collection, you're picking up the buckets and swapping them out. Do you,
we are not in the swap business. We are on the clean out business, but
Okay.
it's not meaningfully different.
Yeah.
I mean,
well,
it is. Were you going to ask about how it gets cleaned on site? Was that the question?
Yeah, and if you use pressure washing and if there's any concerns around that.
Yeah, we use pressure washers on site for our for 64 and 32 gallon cans when we wash them, but that's not what we use for our residential service. That's for cleaning bins related to the larger scale collection. And we are not currently doing anything differently as a result of that. People are wearing masks, people are wearing gloves, people are being careful.
Yeah, good. Okay, so there's been a few comments just that, in some areas like Western Massachusetts, somebody comments if you put your bin out at night, you get problems with squirrels and critters. So they asked them to put them out a little earlier in the morning. So yeah, again, this point about every communities is, we're not all exactly the same. Let me just, we have a few more minutes. I just want to move to some of the bigger questions, just kind of on the messaging back is, how do we convince the public it's important to compost now more than ever, especially when everybody's freaked out about germs and, food waste, can be yucky. It is biodegradable and starts breaking down, especially when it's really wet. Jeremy, I know you kind of commented already. I don't know, Daryl, it sounds like you're not, having to really convince the public. You've got you're in a progressive community in Tacoma Park, but if you want to, I don't know if you have any comments, just go down the line here in order. Daryl, anything you want to add on kind of messaging and communications for why food waste recovery still is very important to maintain and continue to do safely?
Brenda, I'm happy to, it's Jeremy. I'm happy to jump in on one.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there has been a general pivot from a societal perspective to honoring and appreciating people who in the past were not honored or appreciated: grocery store workers, sanitation workers, and so forth and so on. One of the things about keeping composting up and running in a place where there are multiple streams, whether it's private or public, is you are helping alleviate the load on the traditional sanitation system and the people who work in it. So the idea of turning off the composting system so that more garbage can go into the garbage system is a ludicrous one and runs counter to everything we're trying to achieve. So from a policy perspective, it's nonsensical. Two, this is the moment we have been waiting for in terms of behavioral change. People are at home and they are feeling desperate to make a difference and desperate to take control over some small aspect in their lives when there is a general sense that like the whole world is out of control. And composting, as everyone who does it knows, is that thing. It is something that people can own and feel part of, and whether they do it in a worm bin at home or in a backyard pile, or they bring it to the market, or they have it picked up by an individual company or a city, the behavior is the same. It's that sense of, I am living my values, I am doing what's right. So we had a hiccup this past weekend, and it's with the DC drop-off program. We had successfully managed to defend it. And then this past weekend, through a miscommunication, not through a policy issue, but through the things that happen when a whole city is trying to solve for 1,000 different problems all at once, our program got shut down last weekend, and it wasn't communicated as clearly as it could have been. And in the space of 48 hours, we had close to 300 people email with testimonials as to how important this was, and let's get it back up and running. And by Monday, we had it fixed. So we ended up missing a weekend. And it may not, and it happened not because we're geniuses or because there's anything special about the program, but it happened because this is what the people want. So I believe that this is a time for more civic engagement, not less. And it's not about being tone deaf in like in the face of all the real challenges, right? Like doctors and everyone in the hospitals and everybody else needs to have first access for equipment, and nobody is arguing differently. But composting is part of what it takes to feel as like you are participating, right? Everybody wants to be a soldier fighting this particular war. Everyone wants to take a piece of this battle, and this is something that we can do every single day. And I don't think people really need convincing.
Yeah, well said. And I'll just say Sally Brown had a great article in the Organics Recycling Journal, Biocycle. We have a link on our COVID-19 resources page, and it was basically her message is it is not a time to stop composting. It's definitely worth the read, and I invite everybody to check that out. So we have a few minutes left. I'm just going to conclude. I put together a couple of slides here on the kind of 12 tips for navigating COVID-19. These are mostly focused on the collection side, not so much at the processing or home composting side. But establishing COVID-19 policy and protocols. If you have some, again, please share. Communication is important. We cannot do this if you do not have personal protective equipment and sanitizing supplies. So that's critical. Social distancing. Daryl, I think, talked about providing uniforms and laundering services. Each of her collectors has 11 uniforms. I'm not sure you mentioned the number, but enough for 2 weeks. Suspending collection of tissues and paper towels is a good idea. Assigning each vehicle to a specific employee. No contact with customers at all. Sanitize. Some examples of pivoting your business model and services. Encouraging home composting, and then to Jeremy's point, which I think you said very eloquently, fight for the right to safely provide food waste recovery and composting as an essential service. We know that a lot of frontline communities of color are too often the ones that are bearing the burden of pollution and climate change impacts, including from waste, including from overconsumption of materials that fuels fossil fuel use too. We are still facing a very short window to stem climate destruction, and we know that food waste reduction and recovery is one of the best short-term strategies we have available. So now is not a time to stop composting. We also now know that communities of color are disproportionately, being ravished by this virus right now. And the sad irony is that, burning the trash in cities like Baltimore or Detroit contribute to air pollution and respiratory illnesses. So again, this is not a time to give up on environmental laws and services. This is not a time to stop composting. It is a time to implement safe protocols and to be safe. And I'll just conclude by saying, tune in to next week's webinar, check out the previous ones, and thank you to the U.S. Composting Council for hosting and convening these webinars. And both organizations are, of course, open to feedback and your suggestions. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thank you, Brenda, for your leadership. We really appreciate it.
Oh,
Thanks.
thank you.